Devair Estate, Azure Isles, 981 IH. Galen Devair sat at a carved wooden table, decorated with gold leaf filigree and precious metal inlays, in the parlor of his family's estate in the Azure Isles. The 2-day journey from the port of Thronefast was more taxing at his old age, and he generally spent the first day back resting. He could not afford it today.
Roderick, you can bring in my guests now,
Galen said, wiping the last of the fruit preserves from the corners of his mouth. Roderick Telring, the Count's personal servant, nodded his head and disappeared through the door connecting to the kitchen. Roderick Telring had grown up with the Count's sons, as the son of Galen's money manager. With an empire as big as the Devairs, they had ceased being able to manage all their holdings personally several generations ago. Roderick had proven to be more reliable than Galen's own entitled and aloof boys. The oldest, Gaddicus, spent all his time in the military until his marriage to Queen Amentheo and his untimely death. The other, Galleon, spent all his time adventuring for rare and prized animals. Both did not take their responsibilities to their family's businesses seriously. Roderick had the best of both worlds, having a financial advisor as a father and the Devair self-motivation and business sense. Galen could see Roderick managing the estate for his posterity whenever it was time for him to die, and so he was generally involved with all the business dealings that Galen pursued, all except for this one. A well-dressed merchant was led into the parlor by Roderick. He took the cue of Galen's nod in his direction and exited into the hallway on the other side of the room, shutting the door behind him.
Do you have it?
Asked Galen as he called the merchant to join him at the table.
I do, Your Grace,
the merchant said, pulling out a cylinder and handing it over to Galen as he sat down.
The lost letter of Paya the Vigilant. It was in the most obscure place, and all the way to...
Did you read it?
Old enough to discern its contents and verify its origin. I followed the instructions. No copies were made, and no one was told of its existence. Even those who had it were unaware of its significance.
Very good. You have done a great service, and your payment in full is there in that bag beside your chair,
Galen said, standing from the table and extending his hand to the merchant. The merchant shook his hand and delightedly grabbed the payment and was led through the door by which he entered. As he was leaving, a Mer in fine clothing passed through the door and into the parlor. He was tall and thin, his skin pulled tightly across his bones and muscles, and his face was long and slender, the caricature of a brooding villain. Yet, as he approached Count Devair, his mannerisms, from his walk to the precise placement of his body in the empty chair at the table, gave an air of sophistication, elegance that money and upbringing only created.
Yes. How do you do, Your Grace? I took the liberty of inviting myself in, sensing my assistance to be needed.
The Count sat back down to his table.
I don't have time for the pleasantries, M, especially your enduring brand. You know what to do.
M, the slender Mer, stood up from the table, bowed elegantly to the Count, and headed back out the same door.
And M,
Galen called to him as he left.
See to it his family still gets the payment. I don't want people thinking I don't pay my debts.
M nodded and continued on.
And quick and painless, he was, after all, a good man.
Galen called out again as M turned out of sight. M acted as if he didn't hear the last instruction. He mumbled under his breath as he headed down the hall.
None are good, Your Grace. Not even one.
The Azure Isles, in the Sea of Bethrael, 526 IH.
Shh.
Val hissed at Cater, both crouched behind a jagged boulder, one of many lining the coast of the large island due north of Hangor.
It comes.
It had taken 5 days to get to this island in the wilds of Terminus. The mountain gap they took north from Hangor could barely be called a gap or a pass. More like a stone slalom that had been full of all sorts of nasty bugs and wildlife, creeping back to the surface at the warming of the season. The small skiff that was part of Hangor's beach camp was difficult to work. Cater did not grow up on the coast, but every human knew the basics of sailing. It was in their blood. The mast was little more than driftwood crudely tied together that had to be managed each time the wind changed. The boat didn't leak, but it also didn't want to propel either. The bottom had no keel, even though it was oblong. There was nothing to keep it on track. It was almost as hard as steering a soup bowl. They had just disembarked after 2 days of maneuvering the smaller islets scattered around the main islands. The chain was mostly devoid of animal life, but there was an endless variety of plants that Cater had never seen before. At night, the flowers were blooming now in early planting season, glowed blue and purple and pink, lighting up the ground around them. The multitude of small outcrops in the blackness of the seas made their journey at night seem like they were floating through the heaven, past 1,000 stars. And once they had landed, anything that had once been beautiful about this place disintegrated at the sight of the creature before them. It appeared as a dog, ravenous and wild, but with a gait similar to a man, standing on 2 legs and hunched over. It spoke no words, but made snarling sounds at no enemy. It was as if the beast was tortured or mad. Val had immediately ducked behind a boulder at the side of it. Cater had struggled to get a good look, constantly being dragged down behind the rock.
Knocked.
Not what?
Val turned back to him.
Knocked,
she said, pronouncing as slow and condescendingly as she could, and then turned back around. They did not speak for a while, as Val followed the movements of the beast, studying something that Cater did not understand. Then she finally spoke.
I think that is the one.
She said, still as quietly as she could.
If one, we can fight. If more, we die.
She turned back around to the beast.
Wait, what? Die? 1, it doesn't look that tough. And 2, are you sure there's only 1?
Val kept looking.
Are you ready to fight?
Cater began to give his reservations when Val slid past the rock and threw a ball of fire from her hand, instantly lighting a patch of fur on fire on the backside of the Knocked. Cater scrambled out behind her. The beast let out an abrupt shout, similar to a hound's bark, but deeper and more refined. It spun quickly toward Val and raised its 2 massive arms in the air, enlarging itself and showing off its long and sharp claws. His dark fur bristled, raising from its resting position. It snarled again at Val and suddenly broke into a fierce run for her. Cater timed his cutoff point to the approaching beast, who was paying no attention to Cater's presence in this periphery. Cater met it just 10 paces from Val. He jumped and thrust both feet directly into the side of the creature, giving all the strength he had to counter its momentum. Now that Cater was close to it, he noticed it was much taller than either one of them, if it were stretched out, and its arms were as big as Cater's legs. The blow landed squarely, and while generally the force of the kick would send a man hurling away, the beast absorbed the blow and caught its tumble with its massive arm, and then recovered and grabbed Cater's leg with its other arm as he lay on his back from the strike. Cater reached up to grab the beast's hands and pry it away, but it was too late. The beast swung him around like a pendulum, forcing Cater back straight, and let him go, sending him into a nearby rock, knocking the wind from his lungs. Val set another fireball into the creature's back, trying to regain its attention. Her dagger was already drawn, and she rushed its backside and gashed deeply into its shoulder, prompting a roar.
What is that thing?
Cater finally drew breath to shout. He got slowly up to his feet and ran back to the creature, using the opportunity to kick as hard as he could at the creature's knee joint. His kick ricocheted off, barely moving it. It turned back around to Cater and swung its clawed hand at Cater's face. At least he isn't fast, Cater thought, ducking the blow and responding with a blow of his own to the creature's snout. He backed away, not enjoying the proximity to the powerful creature's grasp. Val took her turn, seeing the creature was disoriented by multiple attackers. She plunged her dagger into the creature's ribcage to the hilt. It roared again, but reacted too fast for Val, rotating around and grabbing her knife and breaking the handle off, leaving the blade in his side. His hand came around and barely caught it, dodging Val's shoulder, the claws effectively shredding through the leather piece covering her upper arm. The speed of the blow turned her body, almost knocking her to the ground. Cater had his blade, but it appeared the damage from the cuts were not having the impact they should have. The ferocity of the beast was overtaking its sense of pain. Cater took a step back and almost tripped over a large piece of driftwood that was lying on the ground. Cater picked it up without thinking and swung hard down the outstretched arm of the Noct. A sickening crack, like the breaking of a branch, sounded off as the creature's arm bent back and at an unnatural angle, followed by bones protruding from his fur. The creature turned back to Cater, only slightly slowed by its new injury. Cater tucked his body and rolled past the turning creature and stood back up before the creature could react. Cater swung the branch back around, connecting with the sides of its head, staggering it down to its 3 working limbs. Val shouted at Cater.
"Now, kill!"
Cater noticed the spine close to the surface of the skin on the neck where it enters the skull as the creature crawled facing downward. He held the branch tightly in his right hand, swung his body around full circle to the left, and brought the branch down with all his might to the back of its neck. The branch finally gave way and cracked down the middle, almost separating it in two. The creature slumped to the ground with a noticeable dent in the back of its neck and a visible mark where the spine sank deep into the creature's body, detaching from the rest. Cater spun around, searching the horizon. This creature had made enough noise to alert any other within 500 paces. He looked over at Val. She was holding her arm, trying to stop the bleeding from the gash where one of the claws had sunk deep enough to get her through her armor. Cater knew she would be fine, so he decided to act like it.
What do you think you're doing?
We kill Noct.
Val shot back, not showing any signs of weakness.
Oh, you could have told me first. I don't even know what that thing is. And you go running in, expecting me to help? You are horrible at communicating. You know that.
Val snarled at Cater, who she felt was always whining after they won a fight.
So, are you gonna tell me what that was?
I say, Noct. Noct bad. Like not so bad. Noct can no turn back from Roek. Is dog.
Turn back. What?
Val pulled some bandages from her satchel, along with some herbs, and began wrapping her arm.
Noct. Like not dog. They change to dog. Noct cannot change back. They're like a beast.
So, you're telling me that something turned that thing into a dog monster? What did that?
Noct.
Cater stopped asking. The look on his face made it clear they weren't getting anywhere with clearing up what this was or from where it had come. Val grabbed her satchel and headed into the heart of the large island's dense foliage up from the beach. She reached the edge of the brush when they heard the long blow of a horn. Val stopped. She hesitated, looked around, and then bolted for a thick patch of bush annexed from the foliage at the edge of the beach. Cater followed. Silence. Val peered out from the cover as vigilant as before, but this time with no subject.
Orcs?
Cater asked quietly.
They here?
Val waited a moment before answering.
No. Leica.
The gates have thrown fast. The capital of men. 981 IH. The bustle at the gate during midday was almost unbearable. There were many traders inside the citadel, but for some reason, caravan traders and pushcart vendors were allowed to set up in between the two entry portcullises. It congested all the traffic coming in and out, made a haven for slick-fingered youths to earn their meal for the day for their gangs, and it did, however, make entry into the city undercover much easier. Monikaros buried his beard into his chest, staring at the ground as he made his way through the front gates. He had been growing it out for a month, hoping to hide his identity. It, coupled with the longer hair, did hide the face known to so many around the city. He was generally well shaven and his hair cut short, except for a tuft on top that kept his helmet from rubbing on his scalp. Now, with his hair to his shoulders and a beard to match, he entered the city with anonymity. He turned the corner in the courtyard and headed east for the nobles' district. In the distance, across the courtyard, he saw the white stone tower of the Temple of Asirico. He scoffed slightly under his breath, thinking of Luke Demith. Word out in Avendir's Pass had been that a high priest had been slain by Karos while on a pilgrimage to pay homage to the soldiers who lost their lives during the Deicide War. He would have killed him if he had the opportunity. Therek had told him that the assassin, known around King's Reach as M, had left his calling card. The high-profile targets that M had been associated with were mostly businessmen or low-level politicians. For years, the guard had been trying to connect him with one of the nobles in the city, but no clear suspect had ever emerged. There were so many shady politicians in this city, it was hard to tell which would be more sinister. A group of guards shuffled down the cobblestone path toward the taverns and their lunch. Karos recognized Demnon in the bunch and turned slightly toward the towering stone wall to his right. He didn't turn. The piece of parchment that Therek had brought tied the Devayer to Luke Demith and his hunt for the weapon, but did not help with who M was working for. On one hand, there were plenty who would have loved to see the Count Devayer and his family reduced to ash. They owned most major importing from Frozenocta to the north and from the eastern region of Rainfall. Ships were much faster for transporting goods than overland. Having the Devayers out of the way opened up a major cash cow for another affluent house. The problem was, they were now part of the crown, with the Count's son marrying the late king's daughter. So, on the other hand, M could also be in the employ of the Devayers, and he was sent to deal out punishment for Karos' escape. Either way, the answer may be found in the house of the Devayer family. Karos turned into Avendir's courtyard, the name of the very rich neighborhood that housed the manors and the nobles of Thronefast. The Devayer Manor was a renovation, with the Devayers just breaking into the high society of Thronefast in recent past. They had converted the older estate into one of the most expensive and modern homes in the district. He found the alley between the target and the next home over the wall and walked around to the back. The guards who generally patrolled the neighborhood were on duty change at the other end of the district, so he had a comfortable span of time to make his move. He settled around back and up against a stack of old crates and pulled a rough sketch drawing from his pocket. The Count's study seemed to be on the back side of the house on the second floor. He had received some information on the house in a tavern in Avelia, the nearby village, a few nights ago. There was a roughneck carpenter in there that had assisted on one of the renovation jobs a couple of years ago. It was old information, but it was all Karos had. He peered around to make sure the alley was empty, and then sprang up onto the tower of crates. The house was a good 3 cubits from him, but the back balcony was right in front of him, and he only needed to get his fingers on the ledge. He jumped. The crate on which he had stood slid under his planted foot and took distance from his attempt. He reached out as much as he could and with one hand grabbed a spindle on the balcony while the rest of his body swung wildly into the side of the house. He heard a plate fall on the inside of the wall. Amani scrambled up the railing as fast as he could and hid in the dark corner of the balcony, out of sight of the alley below. Looking out, all he could see was the top of the wall of the city, the view beyond to the coastal mountain range across the harbor's entrance. No sound was heard from inside the house. He had also picked up information that the Count was out of town and had returned to his home in the Azure Isles days prior. It was generally a housekeeper that stayed there and managed the property while the master was away, but these women saw themselves as upper crust high society and spent most of their days in the parlors telling tales of their own significance. They were a tawdry bunch, but their daughters, on the other hand. He tried the door handle behind him. Locked, obviously. He slid the lockpicks from his leather belt, staring at it for a moment, and feeling the chilling memory of being strapped to that bloody table surrounded by corpses. The door creaked open as he put the lockpicks back. Elegant furniture was wall to wall. The flooring was two-tone scraped wood, tapestries on every wall, and then he saw the bed. Of all the things he had lost in these circumstances, he missed his bed the most. He envied the down blankets and pillows adorning the thick stuffed mattress. It had been pallets outside her disgusting tavern cells for rent since he had left here months ago. And then he saw a door to his right. The parlor was not large, but it was extravagant. The desk of the Count de Valliere took up a third of the room, it seemed. Papers were stacked neatly in piles to the side of the high-back leather chair. Amani rifled through them with his fingers, looking for any useful information. There was nothing there but business correspondence and financial documents. He stepped to the side of the desk and knocked over a wastebasket. A crumpled parchment rolled out. Amani stretched it out on the desk. Tea. Heading north. The package is arriving. Looks promising. Hold the merchant until I come. Ensure M is back as well. Send contingency to the pass, the Dark Hollow, the North To. The letter was abandoned at what appeared to be the North Tusk. It was hard to say for certain, but the letter did mention a character M, the pass, Dark Hollow. The Dark Hollow used to refer to Luxon Hollow, a mountain gap with steep sides, thick brush, and rumors of banshees and goblins occupying the ruins of an old manor built precariously on the side of a mountain. Hag Mildred's old cottage was said to be one of the original servants' quarters at the entrance to the Luxon Hollow. Karras rifled through the top drawer of the desk and pulled out a flint scrape. He set the paper next to it and squeezed the contraption. Sparks flew out, landed on the parchment, setting it ablaze. Out the cracked door, Karras heard voices, guards. There was a detail walking the perimeter. Strange, he thought. They usually don't walk all the way around the houses in the neighborhood. These were good men. And then he heard the front door open. Amani looked around, trying to formulate a plan. He couldn't open the back door and head out because of the guards. He couldn't run anywhere because of the obnoxiously loud wood floor. He crept into the bedroom and placed his hand on the door handle. The stairs creaked out in the hallway. He timed the shutting of the door with the footsteps on the stairs. There was an armoire in the corner that was large enough to fit him, so he tiptoed up and opened the door quietly and eased inside. And waited. Footsteps entered through the bedroom door. Short steps. Light steps. It was a woman. No other steps in the house. A drawer opened and then closed. Another. Was she looking for something? Was it a thief? The parlor door was swung open farther. The footsteps in the doorway. What was she doing?
Oh no.
Amani knew she was smelling the smoke from the paper. The ashes were ground in his hand and strewn on the floor. They would not be as detectable, but the smoke smell would be. Footsteps returned to the bedroom. The gait of the woman was longer, more pronounced. She was purposeful now. He heard the balcony door open.
Captain, A wider sweep, please, and bring anything back,
she said, and he had heard the door close. The footsteps came closer to the center of the room. She was within 3 spans of his location. There were guards that would be entering the house. If they did a sweep, this would get very complicated.
No time like the present.
Amanikaros opened the door quickly and quietly and rushed to his target, grabbing her mouth and the back of her head and pushing them down onto the bed.
My queen,
Karo said, looking into the startled face of Amanthiel. She screamed under his hand, nothing loud enough to get attention. He bumped her sternum with his fist firmly, taking some of the air away. She gasped a couple times, still able to breathe from her nose.
I did not want to meet you this way. Honestly, I'm a desperate man, so please be on good behavior so this can end peacefully.
Her brow sank low as her eyes glared into his. Her fierceness was apparent, but she kept her calm under the circumstances.
Now, I've been hunted, disgraced, and abandoned by my people, and I partially blame you. I feel like you know what is going on in those sewers, and whether you did it or not, you allowed it to happen. Now, I'm not a ruler or a politician. I'm a soldier. I follow orders. I'm also a strategist, so if those orders are not advantageous for my soldiers or a victory, I make myself heard. It has served me well until you destroyed my life. Would you like to know what I know?
Queen Amanthiel continued to silently stare, and Amani continued.
The Count is part of the hunt for this weapon. He controlled Luke the Myth, who, I think we all know here, I do not kill. He may also be controlling murdering M. I know where he's going to send his people to try and retrieve the weapon for himself. I'm fairly certain he has not told you this because he needs the leverage of this power to stay with his family and not be absorbed into the crown. Especially now that he's no longer connected to the crown by marriage, he is going to eventually try to wrest the power from your dynasty.
Amanthiel laid on the bed, one of his hands on her mouth and his other holding her arm down in case she was carrying a weapon in her dress. His knee was pinning down her legs with her own dress. There was nowhere she could go, so she stared into his eyes, trying to think of all the reasons she had to hate him.
I'm letting you know that I will beat into this weapon, and I will not allow him or you to have it. If you leave me alone, I will leave you alone. If you come for me, I will make you pay. I don't want to hurt my brothers, but I must protect my people, even from their own leaders. Consider this a warning.
He held his hand on her mouth another moment, staring in silence, and he slowly removed it and released pressure on her body.
You think you know a lot, don't you? The people don't need protection by vigilantes against ghosts and rumors. They need protection from the orc, the goblin, the wraith, the drells, and all the other nations in this world who would slit their own mothers' throats for a chance to unseat humans and be dominant. Your petty causes don't interest me in the slightest. But what I can't have...
She twisted her arm out of his hand and sat up. Amani backed up, allowing her to stand.
Is stains like you ruining the shining reputation of humans, causing distress in the masses, and threatening the rulers of my people.
Karo stared unwaveringly at her, allowing her to approach while watching her hand for a weapon.
You come to my kingdom and threaten me in my own city?
I threaten only who bring my people harm. If that is you, it is your fault.
You and your self-righteousness. If it were up to you, orcs would overrun this city, torture and kill all our women. I know about your love for the orc above your own people.
She stepped forward, so close she almost touched his chest.
I'm letting you know there isn't a crevasse, a hole, a well a sewer that you can go, that I will not hunt you down and bring you to justice for what you have done to our kingdom and the disgrace you've brought upon it.
She hesitated for a moment. Amani watched her for a movement. Then he saw her eyes move from his to his lips. Amensol caught herself. Her eyes darted away as her face became instantly flush. She stepped away from him angrily.
Guards!
The commotion outside was loud. Amani raced past her from the door of the bedroom. He headed up the stairs to the upper floor, noticing the guards entering the front door downstairs as he went. He found a loose gap in the roof boards and shoved his shoulder into them, knocking the shakes and the boards loose, creating a hole that was just wide enough for him to crawl up through. The guards were at the door as his feet cleared the opening. He ran to the edge of the roof's gable. It was 4 cubits to the outside wall and perhaps a cubit drop. The only saving grace is that if he overshot, the wall was just wide enough to catch him before dropping down the hillside 10 cubits. Or so he thought. The guards were yelling and trying to get through the opening as he came back next to them. He met the first guard's eyes, not a good day to him, and ran for the gable as fast as he could. The ground fell away, far below his feet. Cars crashed down onto the top of the guard wall and rolled onto his side. He heard the guards racing to the edge, but there were no way they would jump after him.
Notify the city. He's on the southeastern wall.
Shouted the queen. She looked over at him from the balcony of the Count's manor, and he looked back to her.
Remember this warning, Pantheon. You're no longer my queen.
Caro said, looking back over at the city one more time, and then he ran for the steps. Amensol watched him go, shouting orders at the guards trying to make their way off the roof. She stood there for a while, contemplating her next moves. Then she softly bit her bottom lip.